The day my 10-year-old grandson slapped me across the face, my son laughed, and my daughter-in-law clapped. That was the day I stopped being the silent grandmother they could ignore. Because when a family forgets who built their comforts, sometimes you have to take everything back. And I did, legally, quietly, and completely. The slap wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it hit harder than anything ever had in my life. It wasn't the sting on my cheek that hurt the most. It was the laughter that followed. I stood there, frozen in my own living room, staring at my 10-year-old grandson, Ethan, who was grinning like it was a joke. My son, Michael, sitting on the couch with a mug of coffee, chuckled without even looking up from his phone. And my daughter-in-law, Heather, always with her perfect nails and her modern parenting, clapped her hands and said, "Oh, lighten up, Ellen. He's just playing." That word echoed in my mind while my face still burned red from the slap. It was the kind of pain that doesn't fade with time. The kind that sinks into your chest, where disappointment turns into something heavier. Silence. I didn't shout. I didn't even move. I whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart," and walked to the kitchen, pretending to wipe the counter, pretending to breathe. But inside, something in me broke. For 65 years I had been a giver. When my husband Frank died, I worked 2 jobs to raise Michael. I never remarried. I put my dreams aside so he could go to college, get a home and build a life. And when he did, I was proud. When he and Heather bought this house, my husband's old land, rebuilt and expanded with the money Frank left me, they insisted I move in for company. But the company slowly turned into a convenience. The woman who once ran her own bakery had become their unpaid housekeeper. I cooked, cleaned. I looked after Ethan when Heather was too busy, working on her influencer brand. And in return, I was treated like background noise, invisible, unappreciated, and disposable. Until that slap reminded me, I wasn't powerless. I was just quiet. That night, while everyone slept, I sat in my small guest room at the far end of the hall. A photograph of baby Ethan sat on the dresser, me holding him, his little hand clutching my necklace. I used to call him my sunshine. Now looking at that picture, my heart ached. I whispered to the photo, "You were my sunshine once." Tears threatened, but I didn't let them fall. Because grief was no longer what I felt, it was resolved. I pulled out an old metal box from under my bed. Inside were the things that kept this family standing. The deed to the house, still in my name. The savings account details, joint with Michael but funded entirely by me. And the trust papers for Ethan's education, money from Frank's will. They thought I lived here because I needed them. But the truth, they lived here because I let them. And that night I decided I wouldn't anymore. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house returned to its fake peace. Heather posted smiling pictures on Instagram, calling our home 3 generations under one roof, as if we were the picture of happiness. Michael left early for work, ignoring me except when he wanted dinner ready on time. Well, he didn't apologize. Not once. And every time I saw his little smirk, I felt a strange mix of sadness and anger. Not at him, but at the people who taught him that cruelty was funny. One evening, Heather cornered me in the kitchen. "Mom," she said, forcing a smile, "Ethan's school wants another donation for the science fair. Can you handle it?" She didn't even say please. Just assumed I'd pay. I looked up from the pie crust I was rolling and asked softly, "Do you ever wonder how all this gets paid for, Heather?" She blinked. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. Nothing, dear. Just wondering. She shrugged and went back to her phone. But that night, while the moonlight slipped across the kitchen tiles, I sat at the table with my late husband's old fountain pen and wrote a letter. Not to the school, not to Michael, but to my lawyer, Mr. James Whitmore. It's time, I wrote. Transfer the deed and accounts back to my sole name. And prepare the inheritance revision papers. They'll soon learn what happens when gratitude dies. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, golden and warm, but I felt nothing. I'd spent the night awake, planning every step, every signature, every consequence. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving in this house. I was reclaiming it. When Michael walked into the kitchen, he didn't notice the change in my eyes. As I signed the letter, I whispered, "You wanted to play, Heather. Let's play." He was too busy complaining about his job, his boss, his taxes, as if the world revolved around his exhaustion. "Mom," he muttered, pouring himself coffee, "can you make sure Ethan's laundry's done before Heather gets home? She has that brand deal shot tonight." I nodded, silent. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing he had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, I visited Mr. Whitmore's law office. He was an old friend of Frank's, kind, discreet, and loyal. When I handed him the letter and documents, he adjusted his glasses and said softly, "Are you sure about this, Ellen? Once we file, the property and accounts will be solely yours again. Michael won't have any legal access." I smiled gently. "He already doesn't, James. He just doesn't know it yet." He nodded, understanding. "Then we'll make the transfer immediate." For the first time in months I exhaled, deeply, freely. The plan was set. All that was left was to watch the mask of their perfect little world crack. When I returned home, Heather's laughter echoed through the living room. She was on a video call, bragging about her dream life. The cozy house, the supportive family, the luxury kitchen. My house, my money. I stood by the doorway, listening to her say, "Honestly, my husband and I are so lucky his mom moved in. She does everything. I can barely lift a finger." Her friends giggled. My jaw tightened. When she noticed me, she smiled that fake, sugary smile. "Oh, Mom, we're almost out of almond milk. Can you grab some later?" Smiled back. "Sure, dear." But inside I whispered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." 2 weeks passed. The changes were quiet at first. Bills started coming in Michael's name, not mine. The automatic payments I'd set up for their luxuries. Cable, Heather's salon subscription, Ethan's private lessons. All stopped. Then came the first real blow. Heather was at the mall when her credit card was declined. I heard her furious voice over the phone later that day. "What do you mean, insufficient funds? My mother-in-law pays that account every month." I was in the kitchen, sipping tea, when she stormed in, her heels clicking like gunfire. "Mom, did you change something with the cards? My payment didn't go through." I looked up calmly. "Oh, maybe the system updated automatically. You know how banks are these days." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering for the first time. But she forced a laugh. "Right. Well, fix it when you can, okay?" Smiled. "Of course." She left, still confident that I was harmless. They always underestimate quiet people. That evening, Michael confronted me. He'd just gotten off the phone with the utility company. "Mom," he said sharply, They said the electricity bill hasn't been paid. You always handle that. What's going on? I looked at him from my chair in the corner, the same chair where I'd rocked him as a baby. I'm retired now, Michael. I think it's time you start managing the house. It is your family after all. His face twisted with annoyance. Mom, don't start this again. You live here too, remember? I nodded slowly. Yes, I remember. But I also remember who this house legally belongs to. He froze. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. Nothing, son. Just reminding you, things aren't always what they seem. That night, Heather and Michael argued in hushed tones in their room. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the tension. They were starting to sense the ground shifting beneath them, and they didn't know why. Meanwhile, I sat in the living room with Ethan. He was playing on his tablet, loud and careless. Grandma, he said without looking up. Dad says you're old. Why don't you just go live somewhere else? The word stabbed deeper than the slap ever did. I forced a gentle smile. Oh, honey, I might just do that soon. He shrugged. Good. Then I can have your room. My heart ached, but my resolve hardened. That night, I wrote a second letter to Mr. Whitmore. Prepare the eviction notice. Serve it quietly. I want them gone by the end of the month. The next morning, Heather pranced around the kitchen like everything was fine, humming to herself while I brewed my tea. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Mr. Whitmore's assistant holding a sealed envelope. She nodded discreetly. It's done, Mrs. Miller. I thanked her and closed the door. Heather looked up curious. Who was that? Oh, just a delivery, I said, slipping the envelope into my apron pocket. Inside were the official papers, the end of their illusion. That evening after dinner, I placed the envelope on the table. Michael, I said softly, this came for you. He opened it casually, then froze. Heather leaned over his shoulder, reading. Her face was drained of color. Eviction notice, she stammered. What the hell is this? Michael turned to me, his voice rising. Mom, this has to be a mistake. You can't evict us. This is our home. I looked him straight in the eye. Cold. Unflinching. No, Michael. It's my home. Always has been. You just forgot who built it. Heather stood shaking. You can't do this to your own family. I met her gaze. You stopped being family when you taught my grandson to raise his hand against me. Silence. The kind that cuts through walls. Michael's jaw clenched. You're serious. He nodded. You'll have 30 days to leave. That's more grace than you ever gave me. He stood there speechless for once. Heather began to cry, but not from guilt, from fear. And as they broke down before me, I felt something strange. Not joy, not vengeance, but peace. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was seen. The next morning, the air in the house felt different, thick, heavy, and charged. Heather was pacing the kitchen, her phone glued to her hand, dialing everyone she could think of. Friends, lawyers, even social media contacts. Michael sat at the table, staring at the eviction notice like it had grown roots, refusing to move. Mom, this is insane, he finally yelled. We've lived here for years. You can't just do this. I placed my tea gently on the counter and smiled, calm as the morning sun. I can, Michael. And I just did. He ran his hands through his hair, his anger bubbling into panic. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to move? Cool. Ethan's private school. The furniture. The mortgage. I nodded slowly. I do. And that's why I gave you 30 days. Consider it generous. Heather's phone rang, and she screamed into it. Yes, I'm calling to ask. Is there anything you can do to stop this? No, I'm not joking. But I knew it was too late. For 3 years they had treated me as invisible, entitled, disposable. And now the law had made me visible again. Painfully, irrevocably. That afternoon, I decided to confront Michael about the tuition payments for Ethan's school. He had been frantically trying to transfer funds, but the bank blocked every attempt. Mom, please, he pleaded. This is ridiculous. You're ruining my son's life. I sat across from him, hands folded. Do you really think spoiling him with money makes him a good person? I asked softly. He froze. I just. You taught him to hit me and laugh about it. You've raised him to be entitled and cruel. Money doesn't fix that. The realization hit him like a fist. His face went pale. For the first time he felt powerless. For the first time, he understood that respect can't be bought. Heather, meanwhile, had begun calling the school repeatedly. The front office staff grew wary of her frantic calls. Every time she demanded that the tuition be fixed, they politely reminded her, Mrs. Miller, your mother-in-law canceled the payments. We can't accept them until the account is funded by you. Her voice cracked in disbelief. No, she can't do that. I mean, she's our family. That's when the quiet part of my revenge became public. I had emailed a few neighbors, discreetly without naming names, explaining that the family had been misusing my generosity and that the property was legally mine. Word spread like wildfire. Soon whispers floated through the neighborhood. Did you hear about the Millers? Apparently, the grandmother is kicking them out. And just like that, the illusion of control they had built around themselves, the Instagram-perfect family, the entitled little boy, the polished house, began to crumble. The first public blow came that weekend. A neighbor, seeing Heather's panic, casually mentioned to Michael, "Didn't you say your mom did the deed? Looks like she finally reminded you who owns the place." Michael froze. He looked at me, eyes wide, jaw tight. She can't," he stammered. I smiled faintly. She already did. Ethan, unaware of the full magnitude, kept playing video games upstairs. I went to him and knelt beside his chair. "Sweetheart," I said, brushing his hair away from his eyes. "Sometimes adults forget lessons the hard way." He tilted his head. "Like what, Grandma?" "Like respecting the people who love you," I whispered. He nodded slowly, but he didn't understand. Not yet. And that was fine. The lesson wasn't for him, not fully. By Monday, the panic in the house was palpable. Heather was frantically attempting to sell items, trying to gather money to pay off my accounts. Michael kept calling old friends and distant relatives for loans. His pride completely stripped away. I watched quietly from my kitchen chair, making a cup of tea, and for the first time in years I felt free. Free from their entitlement. Free from their mockery. Then came the final legal hammer. Mr. Whitmore called to confirm that the deed transfer was complete. "Ellen," he said gently, "everything is in your name. Legally, there's nothing they can do." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. For years I had been patient. For years I had endured mockery, laughter, and cruelty. Now finally justice had been delivered quietly, but effectively. Heather's desperation reached its peak when she realized the school wasn't going to accept her payments retroactively. Michael tried bargaining, pleading, begging, but every attempt failed. The eviction was legal. The bank accounts were under my control. Even the neighborly gossip had shifted public opinion. The grandmother who had been ignored and laughed at was now the one holding the power. I remember the moment Michael finally sat at the kitchen table. Defeated. "Mom, what do we do now?" I smiled faintly. "You can start by learning respect," I said softly. "Then perhaps we can talk about forgiveness, maybe. But only when you've earned it." That night, Heather cried in the bedroom, Ethan asleep beside her. Michael couldn't sleep, pacing the living room, muttering curses under his breath. And I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. The house was quiet. The storm had passed, at least for now. But make no mistake. The lesson had landed. They had finally understood that love without respect is worthless. And entitlement without gratitude is empty. I whispered to myself, "Let this be the first of many lessons they will never forget." 30 days passed like the ticking of a clock. Slow, inevitable, merciless. Each sunrise brought another layer of panic to the house. Boxes filled the hallway, arguments filled the air, and guilt, the one thing they had never felt before, began to haunt them like a ghost. Heather's perfect Instagram family posts stopped abruptly. No more morning coffee with my sweet family. No more thankful Sundays. Her followers noticed. The comments poured in. "Where's the beautiful house, Heather? Why aren't you posting anymore? Everything okay?" And behind the walls of silence, everything was falling apart. The morning of the eviction arrived cold and gray. A light drizzle fell outside. Nature's quiet applause for justice long overdue. Michael stood by the doorway, suitcase in hand, his face pale and defeated. Heather clung to her designer handbag as if it could somehow hold her pride together. Ethan stood quietly beside them, confused and scared. "Mom, please," Michael whispered. "Don't do this. He's just a child. He doesn't understand." I looked at my grandson. For a moment my heart softened. I saw the innocent baby I once held, the boy who once called me my sunshine. But that image was gone. Now stood a boy who had learned laughter through cruelty. Still my voice was gentle. "I hope one day Ethan learns what you didn't, that love is not obedience, and respect is not optional." Heather broke down crying. "We have nowhere to go. Please, Ellen." I picked up an envelope from the table and handed it to her. Inside were 2 checks, one small, barely enough for a motel, and one large with a note. "For Ethan's education. I will not punish the child for your sins. But he will never touch a cent of Frank's inheritance unless he learns the value of kindness." Heather clutched it, sobbing. Michael just stared at me, speechless. The man who once laughed when his son hit me could no longer meet my eyes. After they left, silence filled the house. A silence so deep it almost hurt. But it was the silence of freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't serving anyone. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't taken for granted. I was alone, yes, but I was at peace. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my chair by the window, and looked outside at the gray sky clearing into sunlight. The same chair where I had once felt small, unwanted, unseen, now felt like a throne. A week later, I received a letter from Ethan's school. The principal wrote, "Mrs. Miller, Your grandson has been struggling emotionally. We understand there were family issues. He talks about you often." Attached was a small note in messy handwriting. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we start over?" Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't the same tears I'd once cried. These were lighter, warmer. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but maybe the beginning of it. I wrote back simply, "We can always start again, Ethan. But this time we'll do it with respect." Meanwhile, the truth about everything spread quietly through the neighborhood. Not because I bragged, but because people noticed. They saw Heather working part-time at a store. They saw Michael taking the bus to work instead of driving the car I'd helped him buy. And they whispered, not in cruelty, but in awe, because the weak grandmother had done what no one expected. She stood up. She took her life back. She taught them all a lesson they would never forget. Months passed. I reopened my late husband's bakery, the one I'd closed decades ago to raise Michael. It was smaller this time, humbler, but every morning, people lined up for the warmth of fresh bread and coffee. And every day, I'd write a single message on the chalkboard near the door. Kindness is a choice. So is silence. Choose wisely. It became the shop's motto, and somehow the heart of my healing. One sunny afternoon, I looked up from the counter to see a familiar figure walk in. Michael. He looked thinner, quieter, and older. He took off his hat, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in him for years, humility. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I studied his face. There was no arrogance there anymore, no entitlement, just regret. "Of course," I said, pouring him a cup of coffee. We sat together for the first time in months. Two people who had been broken by pride and mended by consequences. He cleared his throat. "You were right. I let them treat you horribly. I forgot everything you gave up for me. I'm sorry." I nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Michael. I did it to remind you who you are, and who you forgot to be." He wiped his eyes. "I know." And for the first time in years, when he reached across the table to hold my hand, I didn't pull away. Later that evening, when the bakery was quiet and the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to Frank's old photograph hanging by the door, "You'd be proud of me, love. I finally found my voice again." The wind brushed through the open window, soft, approving, almost like an answer. And I smiled, because revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about reminding them of what they lost when they forgot who I was. Justice had been served. Respect had been reclaimed. And peace at last was mine.